What are international schools like? One way to find out is to compare them with schools in your home country. Hi, and welcome to Educators Going Global, where we invite aspiring and veteran international educators to expand their knowledge of all things related to international education. My name is Audrey. My co-host David and I bring almost 50 years of combined experience teaching overseas to the table. Since David and I both hail from North America, we thought it would be interesting to ask someone who's been a head of school in multiple overseas schools and in the U.S. to help us draw some of these comparisons. So we turned to Lee Fertig, who was a director in Brazil, Spain, and Belgium, and is now the head of an independent school in California. Veteran international educators, it will be fun for you to consider how closely Lee's observations match yours. Aspiring international educators, I'm sure this look at the insider view will be enlightening for you. Lee talked about some of the similarities and differences he's observed among overseas and U.S. schools. While avoiding sweeping generalizations, he was able to give us a taste of some of the characteristics that can be found in either type of school, while also giving us a sense of what his current school, the Nueva School in San Francisco, is like. Lee is someone I would love to work with again, and after this conversation, I'm betting you'll want to work with him too.
All righty. We've got 3 people here, that's me included, that are almost all in the same time zone, so this is kind of cool. Yay! And we're welcoming Lee into the Educators Going Global experience. So welcome, Lee. Glad you're here with us.
Glad to be here.
Awesome. And where in the world are you?
I currently am in the San Francisco Bay Area in Northern California.
Right. And that's been in the news so much, the Northern California, the Silicon Valley, the growth of all these tech companies and all that. I think maybe we'll get into that local culture, how it influences your school a little bit. Maybe we'll see how that works out. All right. So one of the things we like to do is ask for a going global story. What do you have for us?
Going global. I think it's really important to I'll start off on my soapbox. How's that? And then I'll tell a story. The soapbox is there's no better way of making a better world than going global. How's that? I just think
Beautiful.
I know this sounds kitschy and all that, but if every young person or adult spent a semester, a year, 2 years, 3 years abroad someplace, I think perspectives change and shift, and this place would be a very, very different place. My going global story is kind of macro and not micro, Dave, and that is as a person with 3 kids growing up overseas, my wife and I and our 3 children who kind of did all their formative years globally. They are indeed global nomads in many ways. I think life, you can throw anything at them in many ways. Whether it's a pandemic or whether it's something else. Yes, there's bumps along the way in life, but the way my kids grew up, I just think that life could almost throw anything their way and they're going to figure it out because that's what their mindset is. So I'm a big fan of the global perspective, not only for educators, but for the families of educators as well.
So true. We talk about third culture children, TCKs, children of international educators, and that resilience, that problem solving, that adaptability, flexibility. I see it all the time in my children. I know Audrey and Mark, the same with their kids. So thanks for highlighting that.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I think it's beautiful, and the world would definitely be a better place if more people could expand their horizons by, going globally, even for a short time.
Yeah, even semester exchange programs, right?
Yes.
For at university level, I think are life-changing, transformative experiences if you embrace them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for that. So we're going to start with our guiding question and then head into some sub questions to support it. Then the guiding question is, what was your experience going from being a head of various schools overseas to becoming head of an independent school in the United States that has some international aspects? And the first sub question is, you've led overseas international schools and now you head one in the US. What supported you most when moving from leading those international schools overseas to leading this independent school with a significant international student population in the US? So please share your journey from sort of international to US based.
Yeah, I'd love to, Audrey. I'm at the Nueva School, which is a pre-K 12 school in the Bay Area, 2 campuses, about 1,000 kids. I think the biggest shifts or surprises or adjustments that a leader of schools needs to think about, or an educator at schools needs to think about, I think about a couple of things. One, the level of transience in international schools, just by its very nature, can be very high, right? It's not always high depending on the school and the country and the city, but I would say typically, generally, there's a decent amount of transience in international schools. Transience in student family populations, transience in the employee base. That transience tends to not be so high in independent schools in the US. It can be, but generally it's much lower. People stick around for, it's a pre-K through 8th grade school. They're there for the 10 years. If it's a pre-K through 12th grade school, like mine currently is, sure, we'll have people here that come in high school, middle school, but many of them are starting in pre-K and staying with us for 14 or 15 years, whatever it is. So I think that transience is a little different, the level of transience. And I think whether you're a teacher or a leader, I do think that you need to adjust accordingly. The other thing I've noticed in the US, and I'm not placing a value judgment on it, but maybe in between the lines you'll hear what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
I think in some independent schools in the US, there sometimes is a uniformity in direction traveled. And let me explain that, what I mean by that. I'm in a fairly high performing independent school in the Bay Area. And I think our graduates are very kind of almost fixed on what the eventual end product outcome is going to be. They're going to go to Ivy League schools in the States. They're going to go maybe to the best art and design schools in the States. They're going to maybe take a gap year, but that's pretty small number of kids. Whereas my experience in international schools, there was a lot more variability in where kids and families aspired to be after their school experience. I think they're going to universities all over the world, right? The US,
Yeah.
the UK, and Switzerland, and all over the place.
Canada.
And so Canada, yeah, I forgot about that, Audrey. Sorry about that. Uh, I just think that that's something that leaders like myself and educators need to think about. And then the only other thing I'll mention is, and I'm still playing with how it impacts me as a leader, there's something about the presence in the community of these schools. And maybe we'll come back to this a little bit later with some other questions, but many, if not most international schools that I'm aware of and I've worked in just gravitate toward being the center of community for many expats, but not only the expats, sometimes even for the local population. And that's great. And it's wonderful because of the services and the resources and the networking that those schools offer. And that's not necessarily the case in the US. There's all kinds of other resources out there in the community. There are clubs and there are church groups and there are all kinds of things that the community accesses. which means that they might not rely on wholeheartedly the school to be the center of community. In my case, at Nueva, we tend to be kind of the center of community in many ways for a variety of reasons.
Well, that's cool.
All right, let's continue with that theme. And you're partially kind of answering the next question I have, but I'm going to get specific with some of the wording. And I've worked in independent schools as well. And one of the things I've noticed over the years depends on the city, the population, but some of them can have niches and they give parents some choices as they're compared whether to go to public school or this array of independent schools. So maybe that'll come into play. So here's my question. How would you compare the mission? So we talk so much about mission statements in international schools. So keeping that in mind, and then the identity of international schools, as you've just described, is kind of the center of life for so many communities, expatriate communities, places where you've worked. How do they compare with those in the U.S.? So we've got the two schools in Minnesota and California. So how do you compare mission and identity?
So, Dave, I think in some ways, I believe the variation between schools within the international sphere and also within the USA sphere, that variation actually might be as high, if not higher, as the differences between those two sectors in some ways. I think it really depends on the individual institution, the individual school. Some of my international schools had very, very unique, pointed, niche missions. Some of them were, in some ways, a little bit more general because they're dealing with a wide array of transient expat local populations coming in and out. I think that question is more pertinent with identity, as you mentioned, David, more than mission in some ways. I think there's cultural aspects that are different. Here's a couple of really concrete examples. The language piece, or the multilingual piece, or the lack of multilingualism. I mean, most international schools just inevitably, inherently, it doesn't really matter how many languages they formally teach. The language in the lunchroom and on the playground, yeah, there could be 5 and there could be 55 or more, right? That doesn't necessarily happen in most independent schools in the States. Yes, you will hear other languages. I hear Spanish and I hear Japanese and Mandarin here, but it's not the same level. That is just it's so palpable in an international school setting. So I don't know if that's identity, but for sure that is an element that I think is different. The other one, kind of related to that, the multilingualism, but the multiculturalism. I find that multiculturalism surfaces in different ways at schools. I think in most international schools, just because of where they're situated, how they were started, and how they evolved, there's nothing not multicultural about them for the most part, right? Even those international schools that serve 92% the local population, because those exist, even those tend to have multicultural curricula, multicultural programs and resources and extracurricular enrichment activities. And I just find that multiculturalism shows itself differently in independent schools. Yeah, we have a variety of cultures, but we're anchored by not just US, but here, the Bay Area in particular. Does that make sense?
Makes total sense. So I appreciate that clarity. And especially me, I ask for too many generalizations, but there are some takeaways as you've just shared. And it's important for our listeners who are thinking about going overseas, things that we're so used to, the multiculturalism, I don't know if we take it for granted, but it's a part of our lives. And we need to just nail that one down. That is a big part of life in true international schools, and even some that are serving mostly the local population, as you point out. So thank you.
Yeah, we're not going to go political here, but even even the languages that are spoken in a school community, like I said, it's very natural for kids and teachers and parents just to feel fairly free about speaking what's native to them in the international schools. Here too, at my current school, but I would argue not in all independent schools in the States. And there are many, many places in the US right now, maybe the UK as well, if there's an educator who's going to return to the UK or Canada, Audrey. There are many places where that would actually be frowned upon. Like the kids speaking Spanish at recess would actually be asked to redirect his language into English, for example, which saddens me beyond belief. But I'm not in that position. I think it depends on where you are and the type of organization you're in.
Yeah, I would say the one thing in defense of that is that part of the mission is to prepare kids for school in an English speaking country. And so often it was like, okay, look, the language in the hallways should be English. I think there's some merit to that. And at the same time, I think it's great to embrace all the differences
Yeah,
of
yeah,
language and culture and all those things. Like
yep,
UN Day was always a really special day at all the
absolutely.
schools that we were at. So
Yeah,
there's a bit of both sides to that. But
yeah, I
I
agree,
agree.
Audrey. I think you need ample opportunity for non-native English speakers, for example, to exercise their language development. Absolutely.
But on the playground, well,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's a in between space, isn't it? It should be a free space. But so let's scratch a little deeper on this. How would you say, at least in your experience, academic programs and approaches to teaching and learning compare across these contexts?
And again, I think you're going to get tired of my answer. Maybe I do think that it varies. I think it really does depend a little bit on the school, on the program, on the setting. Many, if not most, international schools, from my experience, have well-defined curricula. Maybe not. They would like to believe that they have well-defined curricula. How's that? And
Yes,
so they've adopted the IB program, or they've adopted literacy programs in the lower school to teach reading, or they offer AP exams, or I can go on and on and on. Those things happen as well in, I think, US based independent schools. I'm not sure they're as defined. Interestingly, because the US, for example, is the home of so many of the academic based standards, right? The
right.
NCTM math standards,
Sure.
NGSS science standards,
Yeah.
et cetera. But interestingly enough, sure, schools are utilizing those and leveraging those standards, but I find it's pretty eclectic, actually, which I'm not saying is necessarily a bad thing. And Nueva is very eclectic and actually develops a lot of its own homegrown programs. So it really depends on, I think, on the school more than anything else.
That makes sense.
All righty. What are some similarities and differences that you've seen in school culture? And you've hit on this one to some extent, or community life between being in the US and being overseas. So you've hit that on the identity and the nature of being very community focused. What are there any other things you'd like to add to the similarity and the differences with your experience?
I think that notion of a school being a center of community is something that educators, teachers, leaders need to think about if they're going global or if they're returning from gone global.
Nice.
I think we need to think about what the expectations from different stakeholders are. So what are the kids the parents expecting of the school beyond the academic program? How much of a center of community are they hoping for or relying on? But even the faculty and staff and the teachers, like, what's their expectation? A lot of times in international schools, the most powerfully positive aspects of the professional experience is attached to the school, right? Beyond the paycheck and beyond the benefits and the housing and the insurance, is professionally and personally, how am I growing? And how am I, do I have access to a positive collegial lifestyle? And that is something that most international schools really need to pay attention to and be mindful of. And that's why many international schools do a really nice job, I think, of fostering that and perpetuating that. Audrey, I'll never forget our times in Ethiopia together where 10 of us piled into a really, really, really old beat up van and drove someplace, right? As a group of teachers, right?
Yeah. So
Um,
did I.
yeah, exactly.
Lugano. Yeah. Such fun
Um, and,
times.
and I don't think necessarily many independent schools in the States, even those like Nueva that has an international ethos to it, I don't know if teachers are expecting that of the school. And so as leaders of these schools, we need to pay attention to what the expectations are. Stakeholder expectations is a big part of that.
I'm so glad you brought up the collegial nature of it. I don't know if we've talked a lot about that, but you just nailed it. When I came back, I worked at an independent school, a true international school, and a public school. And when the end of the day came about, that was it. Everyone got in their vehicles and left. And it's so different overseas, the chance to play ultimate frisbee after school or go to the nearby pub, totally different. So that's something for our
Yeah.
folks to appraise.
Or it shows up differently, right? So I mean, we might hire at Nueva some teachers who are not local, and so they relocate to come here, and they're looking for something. They're looking for some of that collegiality. So a school like Nueva can't just think to itself, most people, which is true, get in their vehicle and leave after a day's work. And they have family and they have relatives and they have friends and they have neighbors and they're good to go. Even so, there might be a subset of my employee base that needs that. And so you almost need to differentiate a little bit.
Well, it's interesting you say that because at some of the schools I've been at, it has been like the Addis experience where we were sort of each other's social group and did a ton of things together, which was amazing. And then I've been at other schools where maybe there was just more community involvement potential outside the school. So people were in a local choir or they, had their lawn bowling group or what have you. Pickleball's the thing
Right.
nowadays. And so even if you were coming from outside, that was less of a thing. Still, though, I would still say almost every school I've been at was quite a hub of social activity for all
Yeah.
especially the expat teachers coming in. Yeah. So it's interesting.
But Audrey, I think the most important thing based on this discussion we're having is if teachers are coming back from being global, they need to do a little reflection. Like what do I need and want, or what does me and my family need and want in this domain? And I should be looking for schools that match that, right?
Yep.
And
Mm-hmm.
and as leaders of schools, as a leader of a school, I would argue same thing, but I also need to think about my leadership responsibilities in terms of meeting the demands and the expectations of whatever stakeholders are in my community.
It's a lot.
Yeah, it is.
So one thing that we've noticed is, all of us have been in different international schools, but invariably they're influenced by the culture around them. So what did you notice about some of the international schools you led and how much the local culture influenced the school culture versus maybe your school that you're currently at?
I mean, I think about the different international schools that I've led. And again, there's just so much variation within them. I think about the school in Barcelona, in Spain. At the time, it was quite local
Mm.
and a little bit more provincial than its counterparts in Madrid, which was more the international
Mm.
cosmopolitan hub.
Mm.
And so that influenced a bit of our programming in terms of Spanish curricula, the entrance exam for Spanish universities, and things like that. The school in Belgium that I led was very much predominantly an expat community
Mm.
and a highly transient community. Expat families arrived and left often within 3 to 5 years. So that drove a lot of what we did, program, culture, things like that. The school in Brazil that I led in Sao Paulo was kind of, in some ways, a very healthy mix between those two things. It had a fairly high population of local community, local Brazilians, who were internationally minded themselves, who aspired to go to universities and the workforce in other places. And so it was kind of in the middle of that spectrum. And that influenced how we kind of created school culture and developed school programs.
To what extent did the local culture influence the school culture in that way?
Yeah. And so I would say of those three examples in Spain and Brazil, the local culture was highly impactful. It had a big presence in the communities for different reasons in those two places, but they both were very, very, very present. And it would be sticking your head in the sand as an educator, a teacher, or a leader to not pay attention to that, especially in both places. But I'm thinking about in Brazil in particular. A leader in a school in Brazil, in my humble opinion, if you don't attempt to embrace the local culture there in relationship building, in collegiality, in strategic planning, I can go on and on and on. I think you're missing an opportunity and potentially going to trip yourself up down the road. Whereas, Audrey, I would say in Belgium, much less so. I'm
Interesting.
not saying the local culture didn't have any impact or influence, but not only the school was such an expat community, but the city of Brussels
Yeah.
is something like 1 in 5 residents in Brussels are not from there, or something like that, some stat like that. That there just wasn't as yes, the infrastructure of the city influenced things and the nightlife and the social stuff and all that, but oozing into the school ethos, not so much.
I love that oozing.
So, one of the questions I'm very curious about are parent expectations from all these different countries and cultures. What have you experienced? And I'm not going to ask you to generalize. Maybe there are some common themes, but please share. What's that been like? Because as the head of school, that we talk about stakeholders, that they're going to be there constantly.
I think parent expectations are key for a leader to pay attention to and to navigate in any school. I'm going to go back, if you don't mind, to one of the first comments I made about the level of transience in schools. I do think that's a driving factor. In international schools, I think many, if not most parents have some awareness and understanding that people come and go, that teachers come and go, that leaders come and go. And I think parent expectations in many independent schools in the US, their expectations are the old fashioned, There's a wonderful, beloved teacher here who's been here for 14 years. Oh my goodness, they're leaving. What did the school do wrong? Or how can we have kept that teacher here that we love, that we have failed because this teacher's only sticking around for 14 years? So I'm exaggerating a little bit, but not so much, actually, because when I first arrived at my current school and I saw that the teacher attrition was a modest, in my estimate, 8 to 10 to 12% every year. And for some international schools, that's pretty low, actually.
That may be amazing. Yeah.
That may be amazing. But here, because of parent expectations, here it's apocalyptic. What is happening? The school is crumbling because people are leaving.
Wow. Right.
And it's like, whoa, time out. We have not failed when people stick around for 10, 12, 14, 17, 20, 25 years. In fact, maybe we need to foster a little bit of new perspective every once in a while. So I do think that those two things, parent expectations and transience in community, go together sometimes.
I'm so glad you brought that up. You're bringing back almost a nightmare of working in an independent school in the TWADI acronym. That's the way we've always done it. In this case, Dave, as I came in as an instructional technologist, and I try to picture a new head of the school coming in and trying to bring about change, which in general with international schools is just part of life, because like you're saying, it's just everything's changing. So I think it would be in general much more fertile overseas compared to that independent school that's been there for a long time. And people have expectations. They've had 4 kids go through and they want Mr. Jones for 4th grade as the teacher. So that's a whole dynamic of the change process, right?
It is. And I will say, and again, teachers and leaders who are coming back to the US or Canada or the UK from being global, I do think they need to pay attention to what level of change of school that they're thinking about working at. What level of change does the school tolerate, embrace, enthusiastically aspire toward? I am lucky that in relative terms, my school, Nueva, right now, is very, very, very change oriented. So I gave you an example where certain expectations were, we got to hold on to what we have. But for the most part, it's very, very change oriented. It's very fluid. And that's why it fits well with me and kind of aligns with my experience in international schools. But many schools don't have that. And many independent schools also, like you said, they think about legacy, right? They think about heritage. And I'm not saying international schools don't. I'm not saying that. But there's a lot of inevitably forward thinking activity in international schools because of that change that you mentioned. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think both are good. I think it's nice to have a balance between the legacy and people staying, and then, like you said, get that little bit of new blood and fresh perspective to come in. I think that's the ideal for sure. You wouldn't want everyone to stay. It would become stale, I would think.
Yep.
So what about governance and leadership expectations? How would you say they differ between the school in Ethiopia, Spain, Brazil, Belgium, and now the US?
I think right on the heels of our most previous discussion, I do think leadership is different in international schools versus independent schools. For example, in the US, the level of change and transition and fluidity and flexibility and pivotability that is required inevitably, inherently in an international school setting is not necessarily the environment that you see in many independent schools in the United States, for example. I'm not saying that it's easy work here in the States. I'm not saying that leadership is not difficult. Not at all. It's just leaders, heads of schools and other school leaders who come from the international world, school world, like I did, to independent schools in the States. I think it's a different set of leadership challenges. You almost need to scaffold a little bit more other leaders' abilities in the school to think about change, because there's deep roots in many independent schools in the States. There's a, I won't say entrenchment. I think entrenchment is maybe too strong, but there's just deep roots, and there's a hold on to who we are, which is great in many ways. But in an AI world, in a
Yeah.
pandemic world, in a world characterized by just kind of what I call whack-a-mole conflicts, right? Conflicts are popping up, and schools and leaders have to deal with all of them as they pop up in different ways. Leadership requires a certain level of nimbleness. And sometimes I think leaders who have only experienced independent schools in their home country haven't necessarily exercised that nimbleness and agility as much as international school leaders have to. As an international school leader, I had to deal with currency devaluations overnight, a shooting outside the school walls in Ethiopia, 2 military coups, right? One of which led to, we had to shut down the school for a while. So the funny example I give here is I arrived here in July 2020, right? Awful time when you think about it.
The worst.
Yeah, I arrived in the height of the pandemic, and people were very worried about me. How am I going to start my job and build relationships? And it was difficult. I'm not dismissing it. It was challenging. But for me, Audrey and David, yeah, it was another obstacle I had to get over. I'm not dismissing the scope and the magnitude of the pandemic, but as a leader, it's kind of like what I said about my kids growing up overseas. You can throw anything at us in some ways. As a leader, I was like, okay, this is not good, this thing called a pandemic, and I'm transitioning into a head of school role at a new school. It's not good, but you know what? I got it in me to figure this out. I'm going to build relationships out in the drop-off zone when kids come back to school with my mask on, and I'm going to meet parents that way. I'm going, and so it wasn't this overwhelming, paralyzing thing that I had to, that was going to break me. It was not going to break me.
So there we're giving our audience a little glimpse of what it means to head a school and some of the factors that come into play. It's such a multi-dimensional role, and we won't go into this area, but the idea of hiring a head of school, where does he or she come from? Have they some type of experiences? I'll use the term crisis management. And you can have that in your home country, of course, but not the idea of going through coups, not the idea of going through wars, the idea in like devaluation. You've been in some places, well, at least one place where at least I understand when it came to getting your paycheck, you would go out onto the black market and figure out how you're going to get money.
Yeah, that doesn't happen in the United States.
No.
Yet.
Yet. I will say the notion of leadership in times of crisis it's sad. It saddens me to say what I'm about to say, but it's increasing everywhere, including the United States.
Yeah.
And so world dynamics do come into our schools, right? Whether it's Russia and Ukraine or Israel and Gaza or whatever it is, those issues are increasingly coming into our schools. And in some ways, in the US, I'm just thinking about this right now, I haven't thought about this before. In some ways, those issues are coming into US based independent schools, I think, in a way more polarized fashion than they probably are coming into international schools. I'm not saying they're not polarizing in international schools. They probably are. But just again, depending on the international school flavor, due to its demographic population, you probably have a whole wide array of social and political attitudes toward those world conflicts. Whereas often in the US, what I'm finding, it's binary. It's yes or
Yeah.
no, right or wrong, black or white,
Red or blue.
red or blue, whatever it is. And those demand different leadership characteristics as well.
Wow, I really appreciate that. And that's part of the multi perspective taking that our children learn in global education, because they're sitting in a classroom with kids from all over the world, and they have teachers from different parts of the world. So that's huge. And speaking of teachers, let's segue into the hiring process of your international teachers, but also your local staff. I think this is another huge question that comes up, whether you're international or, definitely in the U.S., especially if it's a school that has a tendency towards international perspectives and wanting to bring in some of that experience and some of those voices. So what's your take on that one?
Hiring is recruiting and hiring, as you can imagine, is probably one of the most important things that a head of school does. You got to get it right, and you need to be incredibly mission aligned in order to do so. And I really do like to bring in people with international school backgrounds. Some of my best folks here are really from the international school world, because of their flexibility, their ability to scaffold for a wide range of learners and languages and things like that. I think the similarities and the differences, on the one hand, all schools, whether they're international or not, need to hire mission aligned folks. That obviously, I will say, in some ways, I think it's even more palpable that you need to do that in the US. Let me explain. The independent schools in the US can be very, very, very different. We are a school that serves gifted students. We have a heritage in design thinking and social emotional learning. It's just who we are. And that is very unique and pointed. And I want to bring on people that align with that, right? Other schools in the States down the road from me don't have that. They have different missions, and they're looking for teachers that specialize in other things. So we're actually very, very different. I am not saying that the international schools are not different. I'm not. However, if I may, there's something about the general purpose of international schools to serve expat students and families, to serve the local students and families in a certain way, that almost is, if I'm an expat family moving to Singapore or Addis or Barcelona or Buenos Aires or whatever, I'm going to look for the best English medium educational environment for my kids. And the teachers are also looking for the best school for them, for lifestyle, for work conditions. It's not mission related. I'm not saying it's not, but I think it's more than that. It's more than just the very pointed mission of the school. Whereas I find in the US, I think it really is, who is this school? What is it aspiring to be? And do I want to work there as a teacher? Sorry, that was a very, very, very long-winded answer that was inarticulate, but I hope you got the gist of it.
Well, it was clear. You are really differentiating, taking us deeper on these questions. And like I was saying a little ways back, in working in independent schools, they fill niches and they have history and, like you were saying, legacies that go on. And parents choose in that way. And one thing living in Bangkok, I notice, again, with limited information, but the status of a school is a big deal. That school is known because it gets kids to the next part of their academic journey.
Absolutely.
And yeah, and what are other people saying in the community, things like that, that all comes into play. So, but I thank you for differentiating that. With local hires, maybe a little bit more on that one, because sadly, and this is a discussion point in many schools, the status of local hires internationally, where do they fit into the picture? How are they honored? How are they paid? Things like that. How does that come into play? That's what I'm kind of curious about also.
Well, the really good news for me is it really doesn't come into play. Meaning it's not a dynamic that I really have to concern myself with. I'm not being dismissive. I'm just saying everybody here is hired. We have a transparent faculty pay matrix, a non-teacher staff matrix. It is, everybody is hired here with those matrices in mind. And so there is no forced, almost artificial, if you will, foreign versus local hire division distinction, which, as the two of you know, I believe, has the potential, if not embraced carefully, of ripping a school community apart, or at least the professional
Absolutely.
folks, right?
Yes.
The international schools that I worked in that had the least amount of division in terms of foreign versus local hire were those that put everybody on the same pay scale, academic degree, years of experience, et cetera, with a very, very finite number of foreign hire only benefits, whether it be airfare to and from your home of record, possibly a relocation allowance, obviously, which is, in my humble opinion, are justified to get the person to and from the school.
Right.
But the pay, the third grade teacher who is hired on a foreign contract and the neighboring third grade teacher who is hired on a local contract, for them to have significant disparity in pay for the same level of years of experience and degree is, in my opinion, unethical and just wrong. And I don't have to worry about that here in this environment because everybody is just hired in the same way.
Well, that's nice. What is even a local hire? Like, do you actually hire from outside the U.S.?
Yeah, we do, and that's my
Okay.
challenge. We have a few foreign nationals who are wonderfully beloved teachers here, who their visa comes up for renewal, and increasingly that's becoming pretty tricky in the U.S.
Yeah.
And so we've been fortunate for the most part that this handful of teachers, one is Ethiopian, Haji.
Sweet.
One is Spanish. And they've been fortunate to stay for a long period of time, and their visa processes have worked out pretty well. But I will say, a year ago, one of my really wonderful Spanish teachers who was only with us for a year, we lost her because her husband was an astrophysicist here in the United States and could not get his visa renewed.
Dang.
And so he had to go back to Spain. And because of that, the whole family left. And I lost a wonderful Spanish teacher as a result. So that's my challenge, increasingly in the US.
Yeah, I was going to say, yet another leadership challenge to add to the pile.
Yeah.
My goodness. What about when, you specifically said that you prefer hiring people with international teaching experience if given the option? What other practices have you brought from your international leadership experiences to your US based independent school?
There's been several things that I have experienced and led in the international school world that I have loved to bring here. A couple of them revolve around, at one school, we call it Celebration of the World. Some schools will refer to it as the International Festival or the Global Festival. My guess is the two of you have experienced that, right? There's a day or a weekend where there's food stands and games for the kids and bazaars, carnival-like festivities that really celebrate the diversity of the school community. And so I've brought some aspects of that to Nueva. We don't have the same level of internationalism that international schools do, but we do have a World Culture Day that is growing in popularity. But the thing that it reminds me of is about 3 years ago, we're the Nueva Mavericks. And so we have now created something called Mav Fest. And it's the first Saturday after the first week of school. And it is the entire community, both campuses, kids, families, siblings, faculty, staff, some alumni show up. Literally, it's 15 to 1,600 people
Wow.
on one of our campuses with food trucks and games and music and raffle prizes. And it's to celebrate who we are and everything that we represent. I do think that those kinds of rituals, right? Those types of community events are really, really, really important for school communities. So MavFest didn't exist here until I brought it here. And I think I was inspired by some of those, celebrations of the world and international festivals and things like that. So that's one example. I think global trips, Audrey, is another one. Nueva is maybe the most ambitious school in the country in terms of global trips. So our 8th graders and our 12th graders go all over the world. Some of them are language based, in particular in China and Japan and in Spain or a Latin American country that speaks Spanish. But then there's other trips. Our seniors go to Bonaire for scuba diving, and they've been to Seoul, South Korea, and Amsterdam. And I took a group of 13 seniors to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, just 2 months ago. So, just having that, we talked about global perspective, right? Even if it's just an 8 to 10 day trip, it's something.
Absolutely.
It's something. So that's what I brought here.
I love it. That international flavor.
Yeah.
And broadening the perspectives, like you said at the very beginning with your Going Global story.
Yeah.
Definitely, and that works. It's, again, part of our transient nature. We bring new things to the places we arrive at. So let's reverse it. What are some strengths of Nueva that if you were to go back overseas, you would take with you?
That's a really interesting question. And I've given it a little bit of thought. And I think the Nueva School in particular has taught me as a leader a couple of things that I would love to bring with me if and when I go back overseas. The first thing that comes to mind is the mind-boggling amount of student agency that our students have at the Nueva School.
Cool.
So I've worked in 8 schools in 5 countries on 4 continents, and they've all been great schools, and I've loved them for different reasons. I would say that the Nueva School is the one that pushes the student agency the most. So whether you're a 5-year-old child, a 13-year-old middle schooler, or a 18-year-old senior about to graduate, the partnership that our teachers foster with kids to brainstorm and to ideate about their learning journey, it's pretty powerful. It's really, really powerful. It's not uncommon for a 10th or an 11th grade student in an English class, for example, to after class go up to the teacher and say, "Hey, Lee," they call us by our first names, right? So first graders call me Lee and everybody calls me Lee.
Awesome.
And "Hey, Lee, I understand what you want in this essay. And I think you want us to demonstrate our knowledge and our skills in these areas, et cetera, et cetera. Would it be okay if I wrote a one-act play instead because I'm really interested in theater?" And the teacher doesn't have to say yes. But more often than not, that teacher will entertain the request, have dialogue with their learning partner, the student, and say, "Yeah, I think you can pull it off if you do this. Just make sure that, et cetera, et cetera." So there's a real openness and a real candid dialogue about what learning is, what it can be, how it should feel. For Nueva, learning has to be joyous first and foremost. And I would love to bring that culture, that fabric to other schools if and when I go back overseas. It's pretty impressive.
That's so special.
You mentioned the school being one of your foundational parts of it is design. And this makes me think of one of the themes running through international schools, universal design for learning, which has been around forever. And what a great example right there, the idea that the students can talk about how they want to present their learning. But the other side of it is, I do wonder if there are instances where the students talk to the teachers about how they are presenting information, how they are designing the learning experience, just not the output. Does something like that take place?
It does, and it's not as systematic, or maybe I should say it's not as systemic as I would like it to be, but it happens. It happens increasingly, a little bit in an ad hoc manner. So teachers do ask kids, and depending on the age, if they're really young kids, their families, how is the learning environment in this classroom, and what can I do to make it even better? We get some aggregate information through a community-wide survey. We survey our kids in grades 7 through 12 as well as the families about how the learning is taking place. But even individually at the classroom level, increasingly our teachers are doing that.
Really sounds like a special school.
It is. It is. And there's also a culture of, don't know exactly where it comes from, but there's a culture of kindness here that is really quite dear that would be wonderful to bring to other schools. One of my favorite rituals at the Nueva School, in the upper school, I'll make this brief. I'll make this really brief, but in the upper school, right around mid-February, right around Valentine's Day, we have Kindness Week. And every single member of this community, every student in the high school, 450 kids, every teacher, every leader, the cooks in the kitchen, the security guards, the campus support team, every person gets an envelope, a red envelope, and it gets posted up on a wall in a big atrium area that we have with their name. And throughout the week, there are little strips of paper and pieces of and pencils, and the community writes notes of appreciation and gratitude to other community members. So I will write a little note to each of my advisees. I try to write a note to my members of my leadership team. At the end of the week on Friday afternoon, you take your envelope, your kindness envelope, and you go off for the weekend and you bask in what other members of the community are appreciating and are grateful for you. It's not vetted, it's not scripted. It just happens, and it's student run. So it's really that's a good reflection of this culture of kindness that I'm talking about.
That sounds beautiful. So, as we kind of start to wrap up here, wondering if you just sort of step back and look across all the countries where you've worked and led, what do the best international schools seem to have in common from your perspective?
I think the best international schools, I would even just say the best schools, Audrey, in general, what they have in common, three things come to mind. The first is, I refer to it as integrity around their mission, vision, and values. So they know who they are, they know where they want to go and what they want to aspire toward, and they do whatever they can to get there. And most people in the community buy into that. I find where I currently am that there's immense amounts of integrity around its mission, vision, and values. We talk about learn by doing and learn by playing. That's our motto. That's our tagline. It is so far from lip service. It happens every hour of every day. And so that's what I mean by walking the walk, right? As an institution, as a school. The second thing refers to what I just talked about, and I just think student agency or some level of student ownership in the learning process, it needs to feel right for the setting, right? There are certain international school communities that just based on cultural norms and stuff, you wouldn't be able to have the same levels of student agency necessarily as what I can afford to have in the San Francisco Bay Area, which is all about social entrepreneurship and, and all of that. But every school should push to have as much student ownership in the learning process as they can, in my estimate. And the third one is a culture of, for lack of a better way of putting it, a culture of transparency and clarity. I often talk about TLC. Transparency leads to clarity. that schools need to be transparent about who they are, what they want to do, how they treat their workforce, what the admissions process is like, grading rubrics. I can go on and on and on. All of that should not be behind a closed door. It should be out in the open. And that's what leads to a culture of trust and hopefully a culture of kindness as well.
Oh, yeah, couldn't agree more.
Lee, there's so many takeaways here for our listeners. And one I'm realizing now, the population of folks who are looking to return to their home countries, that we're giving them some criteria to think about. And if they're coming back to work and not retire, that you've offered so many tangible things to think about. And I'm really appreciating here at the end that you've given a snapshot of Nueva to give folks one example to wrap their minds around of what a school could look like. And we all come at our desires and needs from our work environment, what we want. But this has been a nice snapshot. So thank you for that. And as we finish up, is there anything else you would like to share?
Well, just to what you just said, we're always looking for good educators, and the San Francisco Bay Area is a wonderful place to live. So keep us in mind. Keep the Nueva School in mind. No, other things.
I was going to say, I think everybody's going to want to come teach there now. You're going to have them hammering on your door in 5 minutes.
Good. I love it. No, I appreciate the opportunity to talk to both of you, to share my reflections. They're just one person's reflections, obviously. I do know that I probably wasn't as defined in maybe some of my answers in terms of distinctions between international versus independent schools, but it's because I do believe a lot of it depends on the school itself. And I just think there's a lot of variation within each of those sectors that teachers and leaders need to pay attention to.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say, because all of us have been at multiple international schools and local US or Canada-based schools, and noticing that you can't paint everybody with the same brush. And there's so many, there are commonalities among international schools versus public local schools, and then independent schools kind of in between somewhere. But again, each school is so different. And thank you for painting that picture very clearly.
You're welcome.
And not painting everyone with the same brush. That's an interest. I never thought about those two metaphors. But thank you so much for sharing of your time and your thoughts. And it's always a pleasure talking with you. How could people follow you if they wanted to learn more about, going on global as a head of school, if you will, or being an international school head?
Probably the best thing is just through LinkedIn. That's what I use mostly for kind of professional related matters.
Yeah.
And so I'm always scanning that and looking around and seeing who I can network with.
Yeah, so that'll be in our show notes, of course, and maybe we'll add in the Nueva School website link.
Great.
And thanks again. Honestly, It was a lot of fun and took me down memory lane, which was an added bonus. So thanks so much.
Well, thank you, Audrey. Thank you, David. It was a real pleasure.
Cheers, Lee. Thank you for joining us today on Educators Going Global.
You can find this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, and all the other usual suspects.
Please subscribe, like us, and leave a review on Apple and Spotify, and let your teaching friends know about us so we can grow our community.
Please reach out at educatorsgoingglobal@gmail.com and join our Facebook group, Educators Going Global, if you have ideas, comments, or wish to share a Going Global story of your own.
You can also find us on Instagram at Educators Going Global.
Please visit our website as well, www.educatorsgoingglobal.com. All our podcast episodes are on there by topic, along with blog posts, Going Global stories, and our ever-growing resource library. For now, this is Audrey
And David.
inviting you to travel
Teach.
and connect with us.